All right, we'll go ahead and get started back to finish up with the Wildlife Committee. I call on Chairman Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call on our Assistant Director, Bobby Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. So what I'm going to show you today, if you've seen before, for the most part, I did add a little bit more information, but this is the proposal to consider setting season setting regulations on a 2-year rotation. Oh, shoot. Excuse me. Okay, setting the 2-year regulations I'm going to go over would allow more time for trends to develop as a result of harvest regulation changes. Heard a little bit of that today from Dr. Bueller about the turkey research project. Allow the agency to conduct statewide listening sessions during the off years. We talked about going out to across the state, either in the regions or the grand divisions, and conducting these listening sessions during the years that we're not having the season setting to get information back from the public. Allow us more time to collect biological data. Allow the guides to be published earlier and delivered into the hands of sportsmen with perhaps weeks and not just days to study it and make plans. Even allow out-of-state hunters to make better plans if they have an earlier opportunity to see the guide, because the guide sometimes comes out so late in the year that they have a hard time making their plans in time to come here in the fall. And increase the amount of time that hunters and anglers would have to submit their ideas for changes in hunting fishing regulations. So also, it would allow staff to provide updates. This is a question I think that some people have had about would we not see the different harvest data and reports and things like that they normally see during the season setting process. Well, this would still allow the staff to provide these updates on chronic wasting disease, elk habitat efforts, turkey research findings, heard some of that today, hunter participation or effort or preferences from surveys, and of course quail habitat efforts and wild hog updates, etc. And we would still provide harvest figures from big game species such as the deer, turkey, elk, and bears, like we normally do during the season setting process. So we would still do this. That wouldn't change. It'd just be the difference in timing of setting the regulations. Also, the one thing that we want to emphasize too is that proclamations can be opened or amended at any time if necessary. For example, emergencies or disease outbreaks, federal guideline changes such as waterfowl, if that changes, and population changes if we get some information back from a research project or something like that. We have to make emergency changes or sudden changes instead of waiting for 2 years. And just a reminder too that people always ask, what do other states do? And so we sent out a survey to 50 states. We got back 20 responses, or 27 states responded, which is typical. And 9 of those set theirs every 2 years or more. Some do 3, some do 4. 6 of those only set their fishing regulations every 2 years. They still set their hunting regulations on an annual basis. And again, those are the western states when they get their information back on population surveys or hunter success from the previous year and things like that. They always adjust their regulations, or most of them do. And there are 2 states set theirs as needed. They don't necessarily have a time frame, but if they see a need to change them, they will. And there are also 2 of those states, 2 of those 9 states, excuse me, 2 of those states are considering going to a 2-year process as well. So if regulation, if it's approved, would go and look something like this. We would go through the hunting regulation changes as we always have this year, and then not do it again for 2 more years in the year 2020, and then of course 2 years after that in 2022. And for the fishing, we would do it this fall, and then a year from the fall to get that 2-year alternation there, and then 2021 we do it again. So that's it.
Thank you, Bobby.
Chairman Holder, if I could just interrupt a second, just a reminder that this is a committee day, and so the discussion and voting would just be committee members today, and should it pass, the commission can discuss it all together tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I hear a motion from committee member?
I'd like to make a motion. Commission sets season setting for every 2 years. And looking at those years, I think it'd be good to do fishing being set the odd years and hunting the even years.
Okay, do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Now, is there any discussion? Commissioner Woodson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, first, thank you. My apologies for my tardiness today. It's been a full day, as it has for everyone. A couple of thoughts on this, and I appreciate the agencies bringing this again. I want to say this is the 4th or 5th time we've had an opportunity. So, Bobby, thank you for your answering the call when we've asked you about this. But I'm reminded of a meeting early in 2017, and it was during the season setting process, and we had a lot of new members on commission. We had some very weighty issues, some that were very new to the commission, and some that weren't so new. Certainly would have all been new for newer members. And I remember thinking at that time that consistency is really important, and I actually learned a pretty thoughtful lesson from members of the sporting media and reminded us about how important it is to give adequate notice on important issues like this, which is one of the many reasons why I'm glad we've been discussing this for almost a year now and considering it, but that sportsmen would be able to anticipate ahead of time important issues that are going on. And so whether it's increasing transparency and making sure that this season setting process can be deeper and more thorough, whether it's increasing engagement with our sportsmen and women around the state, setting something over a 2-year window versus every year, and of course allowing for important emergencies as they come into play. Allowing for all of those things, I think, is a very thoughtful move. I think in previous conversations, there's also been some thoughtful commentary from members of the commission about making sure that over the course of a year or a 2-year window, that we do our job as commission and we don't miss important opportunities to discuss them. And so I appreciate Bobby for really making the point that not only the presentations can happen, but I think it's also important that the agency staff is going to have an opportunity to go deeper in the season setting process rather than sort of scurrying every year on an annual basis. And I think that will be good for the resource, importantly. And I also think it'll be very, very good for sportsmen. I think for those of us who really like data and like to see what the impact of important decisions are over a couple of years, I personally like 3 or more. But I do think having the opportunity to have information over a 2-year window without major changes is going to be very helpful for members of the commission and members of the agency to make informed decisions as we all sort of move forward in our calling and our mission on this commission. And so I just wanted to speak in favor of this. I'm happy to do so tomorrow if it becomes a larger conversation, but I thought the committee process would be an important one to just say this is worth a try. I very much like Commissioner Box's suggestion that it be staggered so that fishing and hunting seasons are staggered in the different years. I think that calls even more for the opportunity to go deeper and to be very thorough in the process. And so I appreciate that suggestion by Commissioner Box and just appreciate the continued conversation on commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Woodson. Commissioner Gardner?
Excuse me, at the last meeting, I was expressing opposition to this, but I talked to Kirk Miles after the meeting, and he said that if we were to do a 2-year season plan, that they would have the opportunity to go out to the public and have public hearings and public meetings. And if we do this, I want to make sure that happens. If it doesn't happen, then I don't think we've accomplished anything.
Commissioner Gardner?
Yeah, I agree with with the time savings for the agency part of it, my concern on this proposal, and has been for a while now, is that being a new commissioner, I've been on a year now, and this is really my first season setting for hunting. I would obviously lose the odd years as a new commissioner and a 4-year commissioner at that. So it would give me 2 season settings per stint for a 4-year commissioner. And I worry that you wouldn't get enough knowledge and have that background over time. You know, by the time I get to the end of my 4-year, I really have a grasp of what's going on because it's done every year. I would just like to see some extra education, I guess, for the commissioners along the way that would prepare them better for the upcoming vote, whether it be for fishing or hunting. And I think that would add to this 2-year regulation and not make it so difficult to wrap your head around and give you an educated vote when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gardner. Point well taken. And I do, I would like to ask the agency that, we're still going to get updates just like a normal from every hunting season, and none of that's going to change. It's just going to be primarily the changes inside of the having to you guys come together and do all the planning. As far as what we are told every season and the updates we get, I'm understanding it's going to be the same and nothing's going to change with that whatsoever. And I do think it's very important that the new commissioners get a lot of information the first year they're on, even though they're not going to be voting on a hunting season that year. So it is very important that the agency keeps us updated as a commission. Any more questions from members of the committee? Any questions from members of the public? I've got one. If you would state your name.
Ed Williams, I'm from McMinn County. One question, well, I've got 2 questions about this. First question is, how many seasons do we have now that do not have permanent opening dates?
For the hunting?
For the hunting. How many seasons do we have that do not have permanent opening dates?
I'd have to look for the wildlife. I don't think we have.
I don't think there's any that we have. Any season we have now has a permanent opening date. It's set forth the Saturday before Thanksgiving.
Right. Most of them are generic now.
Yeah, most of them are permanent hunting. All right. How much money will this save the agency? Is there a cost savings?
There's not the cost savings would be in time from our staff and not having to meet so often during this process. It's usually about a 2 or 3 month process, and there's a tremendous amount of time spent in the regions, here in the Nashville office, people traveling, agency biologists, and coming to Nashville to have to meet and talk about it. So it might be a little bit of a cost savings there, but not like the publications will still have to be published. They'll be every year.
So there's not going to be an appreciable cost savings by doing this.
No, just time.
The seasons are already preset. The opening day of each season is already preset. Mm-hmm. So I fail to see the benefit of going to every 2 year when when hunting season's going to open. But that's all I got. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Just state my opinion. I'm going to speak in support of it, but I look at it as not only a time savings, but that's 3 months that you guys can put your time towards something else. We already struggle to have time for WMA man. We have lots of things to do, and when we take 3 months out of the year to do season settings every year. So that's my 3 cents worth. But any other discussion? Okay. If not, I've got a motion that the commission set seasons every 2 years, with hunting being set in the even years and fishing being set in the odd years. All of those in favor, say aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our business in the Wildlife Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Holbert. And that takes us to voting and law enforcement, and I'd like to recognize Chairman Box.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. I'd like to call on Lieutenant Colonel Taylor, please. Voting and law enforcement.
Thank you, Commissioner Box. I've got a little bit of a drainage, so I'm a little hard to understand, but I'll do my best. Last meeting, we talked about freezers and the cost of the freezers and where we were going to locate the freezer. So Colonel Ryder put together a map and had GIS mark all these so you could see a location of each of the freezers and where they were going to be. Also listed on the map are the hexed out counties, or where the landfills are that are acceptable to take CWD deer or animals to and drop them off. So that's just another option. So they're class 2, I believe is what they're called. So it's starting from the west and going to the east. If you start over here, you can see we've set these up in places to expand them from parts where they're separated and not so much driving time and storage. This would be over at the Dyersburg shop in area 11. This would be in area 12, and it's going to be at the Camden base is where that freezer would be located. And if you can see, looking at the way they're located strategically around the regions, there would be adequate it'd be less driving time for them to get those there and get them in a timely manner. And we don't really know how much volume we're going to have in these the first year or so. These we've bid, we're going to be 12 by 12 is what we asked for, so they could fill up quite quickly. And looking at Region 2, there'll be one at Stones River, which is out here near Percy Priest, and one at Unali WMA in District 22. And here in 31, it would be located at the Crossville office, and down here at the Calhoun base. And over in Region 4, one will be located at the shooting range at John Sevier, and one at the Bowser Ridge office there that's district office for District 42. And like I said, you can see all these hexed out counties where the landfills are that would accept animal carcasses. So those freezers have gone out for bid. We worked through the procurement process with state purchasing, and they've gone out for bid. They should be back anytime. I talked to Clyde about it, and he said that there's been a lot of inquiries and questions, but no bids have come in yet, but we should have them in the next few days.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Gardner?
Yeah, thank you. The landfill option for these deer, the question was raised last meeting about how long these prions stay active at a landfill, and that still has not really been, in my mind, adequately addressed. You know, that we bury these out there where deer are roaming landfills, perhaps, and could be susceptible to contracting and further infecting the herd. Can you speak to that any?
I think I'm going to have to let Chuck speak to that. From the biological standpoint, I really don't know the answer to that, but wanted to mark them so we would see them, but he can expound on that.
The best way to think about prions is that they survive indefinitely as far as we know. So I understand your hesitations regarding landfills. The only reason we would consider a landfill as a good option is because it's just the second best option as opposed to, or as compared to, incineration. Now the trick around incineration is that you still have to dispose of the ash from incineration, which would need to go into a landfill anyway. The reason we favor landfills is because, one, they're more readily available than incinerators, but two, they're typically a closed property that has extensive measures to prevent runoff, etc. So it's not that it's an ideal option, it's just the second best option is the way to look at it. And again, prions are survive indefinitely as far as we know it, and there's no safe dose of prion.
So,
Chairman
do you
Cook?
know, do they handle the carcass, you know, because just garbage, you know, it's thrown out and the bulldozers sort of pack it down and, you know, that's the way they do it. And then they finally put dirt over it. Do they handle the carcass differently? Do you think they bury it at all, or is it just thrown in? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I could garner a guess that they're going to treat it just like the rest of the refuse or
The reason
refuse on the property.
The reason I'm asking, as you said, you know, the prions will go forever, and even the confusing part is you think if you incinerate the animal, it's going to destroy the prions. It doesn't. The heat from a normal incinerator is not hot enough to even kill them. They're these structures from outer space, you know, that survive everything, and so that's why you still have the prions in the ash. And it would seem though if they at least buried them, at least animals aren't going to be able to, you know, eat the carcass, and then once it's buried in the trash, it's less likely to ever be exposed to anything else, especially if they bury it at first to keep animals away from it.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yes, one of the things that I'm concerned about with the landfill option is the predators and the buzzards that we have at most of our landfills, and it scares me. I wish we could take the landfill option off the table if at all possible.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, if I may. So, if you incinerate them, these things still hang out. So, is there Jeff? Is there an incinerator that can you incinerate? I'm sorry. Can you get the flame hot enough or the fire hot enough to kill them? Is there such
In the
thing?
laboratory, I don't remember the numbers. Chuck, do you remember? It's really, really high, and it's not what a normal incinerator would do. But yeah, you can do it, but
We
it's
just don't
way
have one.
higher than what even, I think it's in the laboratory. I don't know that they even have an incinerator that, do you
Yeah.
know?
I guess
A normal incinerator that's used for cremation and destroying diseased animals, it doesn't do it. It doesn't kill the prion.
Correct.
Go ahead.
But is there one? I apologize. Is there one? Is there anything in this state that like Jeff is talking? Is there an incinerator that gets hot enough, or is there no such thing here? Or do you know?
I'm not exactly sure about the specifics of each incinerator. Obviously, there's some good ones in the state, and those would be the ones we would utilize.
Yeah.
If we had to, ideally we would have that infrastructure ourselves, but realizing there's
Sure.
baggage with that. But
Real problem.
But that, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the scary part about chronic wasting disease. It's a challenge to educate others on it because they're confused why there's so much uncertainty, but there is, and there's nothing that the professionals can do about that other than do the best they can with disposal, and try to communicate what we do know about the disease and take it serious.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woods, you have a question?
Could we put them in an urn before we put them in the landfill?
I'm sorry, but I didn't even understand what you said.
An urn. You know what they put a dead body in, an urn?
I'll leave that for mystery.
Chuck. I got one more question, I'm sorry. So when we incinerate the carcass and we have the ashes, you're saying that we think we put them at the landfill, they're still active prions. That's what we, without the urn or with the urn. but they're still active. So people using the landfill with the carcass or the ashes, we still have the same risk of it being in the ground?
There's potential that the prions could survive.
Okay.
And
We don't know yet.
obviously, they would end up in a landfill
Either way, anyway.
either way.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chuck. That's your job right there. I want to hear that next commission meeting.
I have one more comment. Angie?
Go ahead, Commissioner
Yeah,
Gardner.
based off of that information, it kind of scares me more that we'd incinerate them than just bury them, because now you've got powder and active prions that is more likely to be carried by the breeze and distributed outside of the landfill area. And that scares me more than just burying the carcass, I think.
One other question, when you incinerate these, does that put the prions in the atmosphere?
Not to my knowledge. I have, in educating myself on this topic, have never heard reference to that being a possibility, so. And, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to point out, I think Director Carter had a comment, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir. I just wanted a half question, I guess, and half statement. To my understanding, all the deer that are in question, diseased or whatever, will be placed in body bags, for lack of a better word. And I'm assuming that those same animals, if they go to a landfill, either after incineration or in a whole carcass, would still be inside the body bag. And knowing that they're not indestructible, there is a little bit layer of extra protection there that wouldn't be there if it was ordinarily just thrown out without any protection at all.
Any further discussion? The freezers? Yes, sir? Mark?
Mark Goodland, Wildlife Division. In my conversations with Missouri, they don't use incinerators at all. They use the landfills, excuse me, with Arkansas. When they use incinerators, what they do is they have the garbage cans, they seal up, excuse me, all the ashes. So they have the cover, and it's all completely sealed. So when the ashes go in the landfill, they are enclosed.
Great. Thank you so much. In an
Commissioner Wood's urn theory. There we
There's
go.
the urn.
Yeah.
I'm looking right here on the internet, and it says that prions can bind tightly to some surfaces, including stainless steel and plastic, without losing ineffectivity. Prions bound to metals seem to be highly resistant to decontamination. So if you put it in the landfill, there's always that propensity for these prions to bind or be bound to metal or plastic or whatever.
Yeah, it survives the usual autoclave sterilization you'd use for like a surgical instrument. It survives that too. So you're cleaning the knife you clean the deer with, it's still on that.
Any further discussion? Going once? Okay. Thank you. I appreciate Lieutenant Colonel Taylor.
Sure.
Thank you so much. You can go and move on to the next topic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Last commission meeting, I was asked by Chairman Cook to come back with a program we did last year during our manner and means and season setting. And what that was we had notes, Colonel Ryder and I put together notes about alternate weapons that are in muzzleloader season. And it was basically responding to questions. So we have facts here, and basically going to go through those and tell you kind of start where we're at right now and go through what we've done the last couple of years as far as comments and so on and so forth. The first thing is our current regulation is that muzzleloading firearms, rifles, and handguns 36 caliber or larger are permitted for deer hunting at this time during the muzzleloader only season. And the muzzleloading firearms are defined as those firearms which are incapable of being loaded from the breech. And our current muzzleloader season opens on the Saturday following our youth-only hunt, and runs through the Sunday prior to the opening day of our modern firearm season, which is 14 days, and it's a very popular season because of when it falls during the rut, and we have a lot of our hunters like to utilize that season. With that said, during this period of time, everybody knows we accept comments from the public, and we break those down into a number of species, and then we break them down into the manner and means, and those are all collected by the Wildlife Division, separated and sent out. We have a committee, a law enforcement committee, that we send these out to. They go out to the districts and the regions and are vetted by them. Comments come back in. The committee gets back together, and we decide what our recommendation through the agency is going to be with the directors and Wildlife Division and so on. In 2016, the manner and means comments, we had 4 comments to allow single-shot rifles, shotguns, and handguns during the muzzleloader. 1 to allow 35 caliber larger handguns and single-shot shotguns with slugs, and single-shot rifles 35 caliber larger, and 1 to create a gun season and don't separate it from muzzleloader open all at the same time. So that was our 2016. As you can see, we had 6 comments. In 2017, we also had 6 comments that some form or fashion of allowing single-shot shotguns and rifles during muzzleloader. Getting into our license sales, in 2016, we sold 20,913 muzzleloader license type 11s. In 17, we sold 18,901, which this year would break down to $642,000. And our harvest numbers are, until this year, we're staying pretty much around 37 to 35,000, somewhere along in there. This year, they took a fall down to about 26,000. And I think that was overall for most of the deer season, not just the muzzleloader season. Another thing we did last year is we pulled together surrounding states' regulations, and as was noted in the resolution from the Federation, was South Carolina, Mississippi, and Louisiana have what they call full primitive season. And theirs are written in with a 35 caliber or larger, with exposed hammers and so on. And some of the other states that we polled have some sort of regulations where they do allow single-shot shotguns, or some just allow shotguns. Mississippi allows basically to shoot anything. Once you get into that one season, if you buy the permit, you can shoot about anything, rifle-wise. It doesn't have to be 35. It could be whatever, the way I understand talking to them. Florida is where you can only load it from the muzzle, as ours is currently. Arkansas allows you to do this in the heavy deer counties, but not everywhere the way we understand it, is the information we got last year. And this year, we've started our manner and means process, and I've done what I had said before. We sent these out. I've gone through and I've seen exactly how many comments there were per issue and sent those out to our committee and broken them down. This year we have 4 to allow shotguns during muzzleloader season, 1 to allow single-shot rifles during muzzleloader season, and 4 to allow alternate weapons during the muzzleloader season. And that's what we have now. Those have been sent out. And we will get together as those come back in before we get to our next commission meeting and have all that put together with the committee and bring forward a recommendation. And that's about what we did last year, Chairman Cook. So I hope that's what y'all were looking for.
Thank you, Kate.
Yes, sir. What comments, or have we had any comments from the public as far as their, have they had many comments as far as the public on this?
Well, that's the last I went through, the 2018. We've had 9 comments relative to those in different ways. Some just want to shoot shotguns of any type, and some with alternate weapons, and 1 with single-shot rifles. So that's what we had this year, were 9, and 1 against changing that season. And I think we had 272 total manner and means comments, but not about this specific.
That's specific, okay. Thank you so much. Commissioner Swan?
Excuse me, in your opinion, because we're experiencing a decrease in primitive license sales, do you feel that if we were to allow single-shot shotguns, air bows, air guns, other types of weapons like that, that it would increase the license sales during the primitive season?
I really don't know the answer to that, Commissioner Swan. I mean, that would be speculation at best. I mean, to know whether more people would want to come, or if you would have people that are muzzleloader hunters currently and have spent a lot of money on a muzzleloader decide they don't want to go if you're going to allow somebody to be out there with a different weapon. That would be pure speculation on my part.
In Florida, they allowed the use of air bows, air guns, single-shot weapons, and they increased their primitive license sales by 20,000 license.
Any other questions?
Okay. You know, I think the reason we probably didn't get more comments on that, it wasn't at the forefront of people's minds. If we had put it on the website or said, how do you feel about this, I think we would have gotten a lot more comments. People comment on what, excuse me, what they're thinking of at that time and what affects them personally. For me, if I'm hunting during the primitive season, I mean, I've got a muzzle-loading rifle that'll shoot 500 yards. It uses a 45 caliber Magnum prime cartridge. So I don't see that it affects the quality of anybody else's hunt, the quality of my hunt, if somebody chooses to use an air bow or air rifle or single shot shotgun.
Thank you, Commissioner Swan. Any other further discussion?
Kate, I just like to say it does worry me a little bit. You know, I look at the book that QDMA put out at the Southeast Deer Study. I know a lot of us were, or a lot of you guys were involved with that. You look at the last 10 years, Tennessee has more of an increase in deer hunters than any other state in the nation, with a 36% increase. We're number 4 in the nation in muzzleloader. Obviously, we're doing something right. I just hate to see a change. I've seen the numbers from other states. I've called assistant director in Mississippi. I've got a call into a guy in Louisiana. There's definitely conflicting stories coming out of each state depending on who you talk to. As far as revenue gain, I don't see any. Mississippi, based on what the assistant director told me, did not see a revenue gain. But I just think we really need to think about this. I also think, you know, we're doing a strategic deer study. These public meetings we're going to do would be an excellent time to ask hunters, see how they really feel. I know there was a survey done by Mike Butler, but I would like to see a more in-depth survey done if possible, and I think those public meetings would be a great opportunity for that. That's my opinion.
Question?
I'd like to piggyback on what Commissioner Holbert said too, especially about the strategic deer plan. You know, so much of what we're doing now is more of a preference, a hunter preference, and I think that's going to be real helpful to know how many people really do want this. And I'll admit, this is the third year that, or for 3 years, I've, you know, thought about this, and there's a gentleman that's really worked hard. He's got some great statistics, and you know, when you read that, it sounds like a maybe good idea. But I'll admit, I've gone full circle 4 or 5 times on this, where I start with, you know, well, what do I care what someone shoots in the next hauler over, as long as they buy their license and stay within their bag limit, to, well, maybe it is going to affect license sales and other hunters. And so I've personally come to sort of, okay, what's a logical way to deal with this? We have an archery season, and you know that requires the most skilled, most difficult, most skilled archery hunt. Then we move to a muzzle loader, and you know that requires less skill, but it's not just putting a cartridge into the rifle and firing. You know, there's much more to that process, so it gets a little less difficult, but still harder than just firing a rifle. So we have a two-week muzzleloader season, then we have 6 weeks of rifle or anything you want to shoot. And so it just feels to me like it's more fair, it's more logical. It allows those people who want to be a muzzleloader hunter that they have an opportunity to be out there with the other folks that have kind of same difficulty and skill level. And so that's where I've come to. I would be opposed to this today. I mean, I've gone round and round on it, but that's after much discussion after 3 years. That's where I would be on this as well.
Again, I want to reiterate, I've got my muzzle loader will literally shoot 500 yards accurately. And so I'm using it during the primitive weapons season. It's completely legal. It loads from the front of the barrel. These other weapons types of weapons we're talking about probably, they won't shoot that far. So I don't know what the big deal is about allowing these other types of weapons, especially if it gives us the propensity or the opportunity to be able to sell more primitive season license.
Any more discussion?
I think one thing we're forgetting and leaving out here is a muzzleloader is loaded from the muzzle. When you load something from the breech, you can load it much faster. So consider your reload time when you're discussing this also. It's not just a ballistics issue.
That is, unless you got one of the muzzle loaders that has 2 barrels on it.
Thank you, Commissioner McLaren. I appreciate that. And no further discussion. Thank you so much for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to thank Mike Butler of the Federation. Come forward, please.
Since y'all can, I'm Mike Butler with Tennessee Wildlife Federation. Since y'all can blame me for this kerfuffle, I wanted to expand a little bit and address a few points very quickly. With regards to primitive firearms, let's start off, and I want to echo what Commissioner Holbert said, with the sense that I don't think the data are at all clear on whether allowing this would cause an increase in revenue. If you look at the data from Mississippi and Louisiana, the Louisiana data we had to get through a Freedom of Information Act request. It's unclear in Louisiana. In Mississippi, it's very clear that they had about a 2,200 to 2,500 license sale increase in non-resident tags, which were primarily from folks from Tennessee taking advantage of that, according to them. However, with the corresponding decline due to natural reasons the net effect was probably not significant. That being said, I wanted to share with you, you mentioned the survey that we did. We sent the survey, it was pretty simple. We did it in 2 phases. We sent it to 234,000 people. We had a response of about 60, I don't have the number in front of me, let's see. It was right at, I have it right here, 6,341 responses when we pulled the numbers for now. It's still running live. Of those that took the survey, 60,000 said yes. Of those 60% said yes. Of those 60%, 96% were Tennessee deer hunters and 94% were resident deer hunters. Of those that said no, which was 34%, 97% were deer hunters and 95% were resident deer hunters. So a high percentage, almost complete resident deer hunters and Tennessee deer hunters in those responses. I would say this too, is that we would ask that y'all continue to talk about this. The vote, the consideration for manners and means takes place in May. That gives enough time to put further inquiry into the public if you want to drill down into the muzzleloader hunting segment of it. From our perspective, the data are clear that the inlines are outcompeting many of these historic calibers in terms of their ballistics. Shot placement is more than 50% of the game in terms of lethality. So we'd ask you to consider that. I think there are two things that we would add to our original proposal. One would be, since you're going to a 2-year season setting, we don't really want to wait another 2 years to have this considered, which is why I'm encouraging you to look at reaching out to the sportsmen in this cycle before May. Secondly, put a 2-year sunset on it if it does come to some approval. You know, put a limit on it so you can revisit it, and if it's not doing what everybody wants it to do, kill it. The second thing would be, we would strongly recommend that you tie it down to the same language that you would use to allow for these weapons to be used in muzzleloader season. Put that same language in the proclamation that requires those weapons to have a rifle tag during the regular rifle season. That way you don't run the risk of losing any sales. And one thing we can say, I think pretty conclusively from data from the other states, is this has not hurt licensed sales in other states. It may not have necessarily helped, but it hasn't hurt from what we've seen. And then lastly, I would just reiterate that this is not being proposed as a financial solution of any kind. It was brought to us by a private citizen who is a friend and supporter and a couple of their acquaintances. They're probably all the 6 that were commenting on the agency's responses. Probably every one of those guys were the ones that were contacting us. And so, you know, we did reach out to, or these gentlemen reached out to Captain Fulton and Captain Reed in Mississippi and Mr. Scott Durham in Louisiana. So if we need to circle back to them, if there's any interest from members to revisit some of their, I think you have all of the actual quotes from those individuals in the materials we distributed previously. But with that, it's more, you know, this is more about what people want to pursue with. I think it's been very accurately portrayed that this is a hunter preference issue, and this is not, it's not always the easiest thing to navigate. So with that, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, but that pretty much sums it up for us.
Mike, on the Mississippi data, I noticed there, I don't know how they, but I noticed the archery and primitive weapon license is one license. So how are you separating?
I don't know that it is separated. I think the only thing that we have that we can share with you is that they have a, Mississippi actually went through 3 different expansions. They went through an original expansion of primitive firearm, and then a couple years later they refined that expansion to what pretty much what we're calling for, with the exception we're asking for an additional straight-walled cartridge restriction because that's what they say they wish they had done at the time. And then they went on to the one you heard today, somebody mentioned, where they kind of opened it up to any kind of firearm on private lands. And so if you look at how that data stacks out, the real bump happened the 2 years right after they did it. And then it kind of plateaus and just sits there. It doesn't really move much more. That's why I'm saying the material effect is probably not statistically significantly different, although the numbers look different in that one category. At the same time, they had sportsman license increases going up significantly, but I don't think that we can say, and I would not say, that season led to the increase in their sportsman's license increases, as much as I would say it didn't impact the non-resident decline, which was in line with pretty much the increase in sportsmen, if that makes sense. It seems like people were converting from one to the other more than anything. Does that answer it for the most part?
I do have one more question for Kate, if he would come up.
Sir.
Cape, on the license recommendation, now, if we allow them to use a rifle tag during muzzleloader season, obviously we would lose the money we would have made if they would have bought a muzzleloader license.
Right.
You agree?
'Cause they would have to
So
have-
we would actually lose money if we let them do that.
Well, the way our licenses are, if they're hunting with a modern firearm, like they proposed, then they would have to buy a type '09 license. And if they could hunt with that during the muzzleloader, where normally they would buy 11, they would just have to buy one instead of both.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Before you go, I just have one question. From a law enforcement standpoint, do you foresee any impact that this would have for your game wardens enforcing their law with the expansion of these other weapons into a muzzleloader season?
The thing I see early on would be issues with people that don't understand the law. They would show up with a Thompson contender with a .308 or whatever, shooting that, or just a regular shotgun and shooting those, as opposed to, I think a lot of people read these and say, well, you can shoot a center fire single shot rifle, and haven't really read down to the part where it says the rolling block. And of course it is, I think the way it was proposed was a single shot break action or a single shot rolling block type rifle. So I think a lot of people just see that and they don't get into the part where it's a straight cartridge or 35 caliber above. So I think we would have some problems early on with that, which would probably cause some heartburn, but that's the thing I saw initially.
And just one other follow-up to Commissioner Swan is that, I understand the ballistics are superior, many muzzle loaders, but I know, the one I use is, I'm happy at 150 yards. I don't, most of us I don't think are using those type of weapons, even though they're available. But it's just the fiddle factor that goes with a muzzle loader that I'm talking about. It's not a ballistics issue. It's just kind of a art, skill, fiddle factor issue I'm talking about. And the other thing that you can't forget is that 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks, folks can use all these other weapons. We're only talking about a 2-week gap. So I hate to mess up a good thing.
Well, I don't shoot at 500 yards other than at the range. Probably 100 to 200 yards is pretty well typical. You don't think of that when, back in the old days, when I first started using primitive weapons, I had a Thompson Center Hawken, and the barrel would get corroded and so forth. So, I mean, it's quite a change, but, and as far as reloading it, I can reload it almost as fast as somebody can break open a shotgun, get the hull out and stick another shell in, close it, and cock the hammer. So, I don't know that that's a big issue. The only point I'm making about that particular rifle I use is, it's just as effective as a modern bolt-action rifle.
I think that's it?
I got one
Oh, yeah.
more. And I'll shut up. Mike was talking about, what it's all about. I personally look at it from a financial side of this. If it can help us sell more licenses, I'm just going to be real basic, that's great. Because for me as a hunter, I don't care who's shooting what as long as it's legal around me. But if we're, as a commission, looking at advancing what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, I think you have maybe an idea that might make some sense with that sunset situation. But I think we need to consider, and you're talking about Mississippi and Bill was talking about Florida, again, that's where I'm coming from. Are we gonna sell more license and have that balance of making sure ethically that we're doing the right thing? I don't know, but it's sure, if there's a potential there without goofing something up, because I'm sure this conversation happened when we had the old style, and all of a sudden they had these inlines, and nobody wanted to do it for a while. Then all of a sudden they did, and everybody's happy. And maybe this is just an evolution that, for us with our deer hunters, maybe it's something we need to consider and not let this go without them at least having an opportunity to grow it or screw it up but it's not gonna happen if we don't give it a shot. So,
Thank you.
And I agree, Commissioner Stroud, and I think it circles back around again to the strategic deer plan. And hopefully, with all this discussion for many years, those folks that are interested in this, they need to speak up, because if it's only 6 people, then maybe the interest just isn't there. But this is the opportunity on the strategic deer plan to let us know if that's what you want to do. But right now, it just doesn't sound like it.
One last comment. You know, if we're looking at a 2-year season setting coming up, we should really address this issue before then, because otherwise, now we're looking at 3 years down the road before it can come up again. So I personally agree with Commissioner Stroud that, you know, this is something that we need to really seriously consider.
I guess we can have further discussion on this until the May meeting. That sounds good with everybody?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chairman Cook?
Thank you, Chairman Box. And we bounced around a lot, but I think we covered it all. So are there any announcements or any other business from the commission? Director Carter? Oh, who?
Chris Richardson might want to give a legislative update.
Hate to stand between you and adjournment. Thank you, Chairman Cook, members of the commission. A brief update. Happy to report that the legislative session is fully underway. This week, the Senate's going to start taking up, Senate and the House both are going to start taking up the budget, which is a sign towards concluding their business, which is a positive thing. If you work in my world, you're ready to see light at the end of the tunnel. The Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee, where most all of the bills that impact TWRA has come to a close for the year. They closed last Thursday, and we didn't have any bills of concern come out of that committee, which is a positive thing. There have been a few bills that I should note. Number one, the House Joint or Senate Joint Resolution confirming Commissioner Sanders has now passed both houses and is on its way to the speakers to be signed, and then to be on to the governor's desk. So that is certainly a positive step. Almost official, just maybe another week or so. So there is a bill that has passed both houses and is sent to the speakers for signature that does give the commission some additional authority. Some of you are probably aware there was an issue that came up with those wishing to track wounded or downed white-tailed deer with dogs. And under the statute as it was prior to this legislative session, there was an absolute prohibition to use dogs when hunting a white-tailed deer, which would include tracking or pursuing a wounded one. So we have passed a bill now that is going to give the commission the authority to pass rules that would allow for that activity. And I think that there will be more coming, a recommendation from the agency just as quickly as we can get some rules filed and get that properly before you, hopefully with an eye towards having that in place by the upcoming deer season. The time frame will be pretty tight, but hopefully as soon as the bill is signed by the governor, we can start that process and get moving. We're still working on legislation relative to paddlecraft and those commercial operations that are working on the waterway. That's actually up in the House committee tomorrow, so I will have to apologize in advance for my absence tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the last meeting of the House Ag and Natural Resources Subcommittee. That they're going to meet at 9:30 and work until they conclude their business, and then I'll have other committees throughout the morning that I will have to be at. So I will not be with you tomorrow. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions the commission has.
Any questions? Thank you, Chris. Oh, Commissioner.
Probably a stupid question, but going back to the dog tracking on the deer, is that at all, even if it's hours and hours the next day, anytime?
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Under the current, well, I should say, when the bill gets signed by the governor, the law will be different than it was a few weeks ago. But at that point, it would have been illegal to pursue a wounded or down white-tailed deer with a dog. This new legislation is going to give the commission the authority to establish some rules to allow that conduct but hopefully still protect against the old days when we had trouble with deer dogging, where people were actively pursuing deer with dogs in order to kill them. This is a different conduct that I think that the agency wants to allow as a conservation tool. Certainly, somebody wounds a big buck, we want them to have the opportunity to find that, and we may be able to put another tool in their toolbox while still protecting against some of the bad parts of deer dogging.
Great, thank you.
I got one more. Hey, any news on the jet boat? Because now they're saying it's coming off the river and it's coming to the lake right there at my house.
So, Representative Farmer from your area presented the bill to through the Ag Committee last week as an agreed upon bill between both the jet boat operator on the French Broad and the county commissioners up in Sevier County area. And as the bill as written would only impact those commercial jet boat operations that carry for-hire passengers in a tourist county as defined by a certain section of the code. So essentially it only applies to the jet boat operation on the French Broad. And the bill that's moving forward would put some speed restrictions, some hours of operation restrictions, and also put a restriction that there couldn't be another operator within 5,000 feet of the current operator. That's the status of the legislation. It still has another committee or two to go through before it becomes law, but we're actively monitoring that, working with the sponsors on it.
So what you're saying is, if it's just for the French Broad, they can come up in Douglas Lake and then they're free to go again?
I do not believe that the bill as currently written would impact an operator that was that had a jet boat operation on Douglas Lake.
It's my buddy Andy.
Any other comments for Chris? Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate all you do to keep us in good stead. Executive Carter, any comments? Well, we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock for the commission meeting. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Second, approved. We're adjourned.